Placing a wager or a bet has been modernized into an industry that has turned into a way to acquire easy money. Gambling has become easier to access as society has changed. The first commercial casino in the United States was established in Louisiana in 1822. From 1849 to 1859, larger states, including California, began to license casinos. In 1960, the state of California recalled its decision to support casinos and enforced a ban on all state-owned casinos. However, this proved to be ineffective because it encouraged illegal gambling. Many games have an advantage over the players because the mathematical determined odds are calculated beforehand. Every game is playing against the house except in poker. In poker, players play against other players. But what is responsible for magnetizing over 15 million people in the U.S. to gambling?
Why am I drawn? Yeah, that's kind of an interesting question, because I think if you gamble, you have to ask yourself that all the time. It's like, why do I do this? Certainly, if you lose money, you shouldn't be doing it. And if you're losing money and still trying to justify it, then you have a gambling problem.
I don't gamble big, so for me, it's just I like to, I don't know, you can call it flex my muscles. I like to show that I can beat the other guy, because I don't play against the house, I play against other people.
There is no doubt that gambling has progressed over time. But in 2001, the gambling industry reached its peak of casinos established in the U.S. This has had a drastic toll on the number of pathological gamblers. In 1976, less than 1% of U.S. adults had a gambling problem. In 25 years, the number of gamblers went up from 1% to 4%.
Currently, there are 15 million people who display signs of a gambling addiction. Since there are 16 million Americans who are excessively addicted to a drug, this proves that gambling is just as severe an addiction.
To be honest, when I first started seeing patients with gambling, I said to myself, this is going to be amazing, this is going to be exciting. I'm going to learn about insider information about gambling, or be able to sit with patients and talk about gambling all day. And then the first few patients I had, you hear stories of, I wanted to kill myself, I drained my entire life savings in a matter of months, my wife left me, I've tried to rob banks, I've committed credit card scams, Ponzi schemes, and you hear just the heartbreak and the turmoil and the chaos and just the devastation. And what's fascinating is that when patients come into the office, they look just like you and me.
Drugs and alcohol have a physical effect on you, where I think that gambling is mental. And I think that people become addicted to it, but I don't think it's the same thing. I think it's more of a mental weakness more than it is a physical weakness that can happen with drugs and alcohol.
Gambling addiction, as well as clinical depression, are both triggered psychiatrically. Those problems encourage and influence each other, causing worse symptoms. A major depressive disorder is likely to occur in 76% of pathological gamblers. This means that 11.4 million people in the U.S. are at risk of depression. Severe depression could lead to suicide, and the suicide rate for pathological gamblers is 20 times higher compared to non-gamblers.
The question, I think, starts with what happens in our brains when we're just gambling. So first, a lot of research has looked at healthy individuals who do not have a gambling addiction and just try to get a sense of what happens in their brains when they gamble. And what we're beginning to show is that the same part of the brain that controls pleasure and reward, that same part of the brain responds to gambling, not just the act of gambling, but money. So just showing money oftentimes excites people and gets their neurocircuitry going. When we're exposed to cues like money, sex, steak dinners, that part of the brain starts firing off and releasing all sorts of neurochemicals. The predominant one being dopamine. And dopamine then floats around in the brain and triggers and activates all sorts of other regions of our brain.
There are 22 states in America that have commercial casinos. They collectively supply about $8 billion in tax each year. The top 11 states that have the most successful commercial casino industries are shown and represent how much of their money is brought in to benefit their economy. The money collected from casinos are currently a huge part of our society's revenue.
Yeah, I think gambling is a major part not gambling, but taking risk in order to get financial benefits is a big part of our economy and infrastructure. I think that's something that's just done.
Was gambling a huge problem in our society? Would legalizing gambling help our struggling economy?
Well, I don't think it's wrong to gamble. I do think, though, that a lot of times people who are economically disadvantaged rely on gambling, or are more likely to become addicted to gambling. So I think that's something to be concerned with.
Yes, incredibly reckless, unneeded. First of all, you don't need to do that. You can just take $1, go buy that candy bar. It's a big risk. It's rewarding, and that's why people do it. Because that 1 in 10 chance that you win, you feel on top of the world because you put in a buck and you win. But it's incredibly unneeded.
Gambling is a major part of Indian culture. With much effort, the state tried to make gambling on Indian reservations illegal. In 1987, a regulatory act was initiated that gave gambling rights for Indian gaming. However, they could only occur on Indian reservations.
Because Indian tribes are sovereign. And most Indian tribes now are building casinos on their land. Yeah. We're kind of moving. It's not like centrally located, but they're kind of all over the place. Do we benefit? Well, the casinos pay taxes, so it helps the California's economy in that way. They employ a lot of people. It helps that way. So.
Indian gaming has a $1 billion economic impact on Oklahoma annually, not only in the gaming environment, but in the communities as well.
As represented, the casino industry supplies many jobs for the people of America. In 2010, we found that the casino industry employs over 1 million people for management jobs and over 370,000 people for casino jobs. This number has shown an increase of over 70% in the last 20 years. Arguably, you could say that the casino industry is manipulative and are taking advantage of Americans.
I don't think we take advantage of them. I think, if anything, casino owners, whether they're on Indian reservations or in Las Vegas, take advantage of other people. It's not a particularly, I don't see it, since I'm not a gambler, I don't see the gambling industry as a particularly virtuous industry.
So there's been stories about people who have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then they've tried to sue the casinos. I think that's ridiculous. Yeah. I think that when you're an adult and you're going in with eyes wide open, and I don't think you can try to, unless casinos in some way cheated you, but that doesn't happen. They don't need to cheat you. They can make money without cheating. So.
Commercial casinos had a gross gaming revenue of $25 billion. In 2010, this number has increased to $34 billion.
Well, no. Casinos, they just want to make money. And the thing about it is, like slot machines or most table games, it's designed for the casino to win money. There's a computer chip in those machines that's like, it's not going to let you win. It's going to let somebody win occasionally, so everybody sees the person winning and they go, oh look, I could win that too. And the reality is that most people don't win.
Where does the addiction factor come from?
So when you take all of that and you contrast that with what's going on in the brains of patients with gambling addiction, and we're beginning to show that that story is very, very, very different. So patients with gambling addiction, when they first start gambling, that neurocircuitry pumps out a much bigger signal of reward and pleasure.
The thing about it is, with people, either people are okay with gambling or they're not. Most people are smart enough where they're going to say, I'm not going to go risk my hard-earned money and go gamble. And that's how most people feel about it. There's a few people who like to gamble. I don't think that, I don't see that happening. I just think that there's a few who will gamble. Many will lose, and they'll say, that's the dumbest thing I ever did, I'll never do it again. And there's a very tiny percentage of people who gamble recreationally.